I begged a man I once humiliated to say he wasn't the father of my child, right there at my own gate with cameras humming and a drone hanging in the heat. He looked at me in a tired brown coat, like truth was a chair he could sit in forever. Tell me this. Have you ever heard your own pride crack out loud and not known what to do with the pieces? My name is Amanda Mandanda, CEO of Manda Group, a woman who learned to count safety in zeros, who built a life where doors opened before I reached them, and problems disappeared when I signed my name. People called me unstoppable, a miracle in heels, the kind of executive who could pull the sky down if I needed shade. That praise sounds sweet until you realize it's also a cage, and I wore it like armor because after my parents died and my ex ran with our money, I promised myself I would never be small again. You know what I mean? Here's the day it started to bend. I was stepping out of a black car, sun bouncing off the marble guard's ready schedule tight. A thin man with dust on his sleeves slipped through the gate because a staffer took pity on him. He said his name was Jonathan. He said he used to manage a bank, said lies sent him to prison, said he came out to an empty house and a wife who had already moved on. He asked for a plate of food or a small job, cleaner driver, anything. And he said it the way hungry people ask, careful, like every word costs something. I held a cold bottle of water, and instead of handing it to him, I tipped it, let the water spill over his head like I could rinse the problem away. He didn't flinch. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, and with a voice soft enough to pass a sleeping child, he told me, remember this moment, because humiliation returns. I told my chief of security, Nelson, to throw him out. The gate closed. Story over. Wrong. 2 weeks later, a $50 million deal died with a midnight email. No meeting, no second chance, just gone. It shouldn't have rattled me, but pride is a hunger, and I fed it by pretending nothing hurt. I drove myself into town in a dress meant for wins, not losses, walked into a bar lit like a bad idea, sat alone in a corner, and drank more than I should have. Neon smeared the room. My car key slipped out of my hand, and a palm caught it midair. Careful, madam, he said, clean soap and rain in the air, not cologne. Jonathan. Of all the people in all the places. He should have walked away, and I should have waved him off. But the floor tilted, the ceiling widened, and pride is just a thin rope when the world starts spinning. He opened the back door so I could lie down, told the guards I'd asked him to help, carried me up the stairs, when my knees refused to show up. I remember the softness of the bed, the hum of the generator, the hallway light like a thin blade under the door. I remember saying, don't go, please stay. After that, fog. Wait. Before you judge the next part, answer this for me. If it were you, what would you have done with a stranger who wasn't really a stranger? A night that wouldn't stop tilting, a pride that couldn't hold your weight anymore. Morning came with glass clear silence. Car back in the driveway gate, tall and secret, and my memory wiped smooth where there should have been a wrinkle. I decided not knowing was better because sometimes you keep the wheel turning by refusing to see what's under the hood. I threw myself into work the way people throw themselves into water all at once so they don't have to think. Weeks slid by. Sleep turned thin. My reflection looked like it was keeping a secret from me. When my period didn't come, I told myself it was stress. When the test turned pink at the clinic, the nurse smiled and said, "Congratulations, 4 months," and I laughed, because people laugh when they're about to scream and don't want anyone to hear it. Then I cried anyway, but only into my own hands. The city learned before I could find my breath. The blogs asked, "Who is the father?" The cameras waited outside the gate. Staff whispered in elevators. Investors called with calm voices and hard questions. At night, I sat in the quiet, with one hand on my belly and one over my mouth, searching my mind like a diver who knows the air is running out. Finally, I called Nelson into the sitting room where the curtains were heavy and the AC hummed like a judge. "Answer me carefully," I said. "Did anyone come up to my room 8 months ago?" He looked down, then up, and nodded once. "Jonathan carried you when you couldn't walk." "Madame, you told us to let him help. He stayed a while, then left." And just like that, the fog rippled. The picture returned, not clean, not complete, but enough to sting the eyes. "Find him," I said. "Please." By noon, the gate slid open, and there he was, same old bag, same tired coat, same eyes that looked like they had learned how to wait without growing bitter. The guards held their breath. Even the birds shut up. "Jonathan," I said, my voice tight as wire. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't take advantage of me." He lifted one shoulder like he was moving a stone and said, "Maybe try different words. Maybe you held on because you were done carrying everything alone. Either way, we both know why your belly is full." The drone above the wall blinked red, a camera clicked 3 times like a hammer. The reporters outside started chanting. My knees went soft. I turned and walked inside because sometimes survival looks like retreat. Jonathan sat with his back to my wall, took out a worn Bible and read, and I hated how calm he looked. That night around 2, I pressed the intercom and told Nelson to bring him in. The chandelier made the room glitter like a conspiracy. "Why didn't you leave me that night?" I asked. "Why didn't you put me down and walk away?" "Because even when you poured water on me," he said, "I still saw a broken woman under diamonds, and I couldn't let you crash and die." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't pretty. It just fit the shape of the truth I'd been dodging. Tears slid, and I hated that he saw them. Then Nelson walked in again, because chaos doesn't knock. Reporters had breached the compound. My board wanted an emergency meeting at 9 a.m. They wanted answers, not rumors. Stability, not scandal. A spotless narrative, not a human being. Do you think that's fair? 3 hours of sleep later, I made a decision that felt like walking into the ocean. I told Nelson to get Jonathan a shave and clean clothes. Nothing flashy, just dignity. We walked into the lobby of Manda Group together. The cameras behind the glass popped like fireworks. The marble under my heels sounded too loud. The boardroom was already sharp with whispers. Amanda, the chairman, began. "We respect your brilliance, but investors are nervous. Is the homeless man the father of your child? Silence is a knife when what you need is a spoon." I said before I answer, "You'll hear from the man himself." Gasps rolled around the table like wind. Jonathan put his hands on the back of a chair and told them who he had been, a bank manager trusted with billions, who he had become, a man life had stripped but not emptied, and what I carried, not shame but a proof that humanity survives image. For the first time, I didn't see a problem to fix, I saw a person. Then the door slammed open. Pattern interrupt. Michael, the chairman's son, walked in with a tabloid folded like a weapon, voice shaking with anger that felt too rehearsed to be righteous. "This is a disgrace," he said, "shareholders want." Amanda removed immediately, and he waved a headline that claimed preliminary DNA results suggested a second possible match. The room went feral. Papers slid, eyes shifted. People who had toasted me 6 months earlier studied their watches like time could rescue them. My baby rolled as if to say, "I'm here, remember me." Jonathan didn't raise his voice. He asked about chain of custody, certified documents, the lab. The source, he asked if Michael was trying to start a fire with smoke. The chairman slammed his palm on the table and told his son to sit down, but the damage was done. The meeting adjourned with a vote hanging over my head like a storm that keeps promising thunder. In the SUV afterward, I discovered a fear colder than panic: betrayal. Who had access to my medical files, I asked quietly, like I could sneak up on the truth if I didn't startle it. Nelson said only my personal assistant and my doctor. We drove to the hospital, white halls, too bright, everything smelling like lemon and decisions. The doctor wouldn't meet my eyes until I told her there would be no lawyers in the room, just us and the facts. She cried the way people cry when they've been running from a wall and finally hit it. They threatened me, she said, Michael's people. They told me they would ruin me if I didn't leak and alter the report to suggest uncertainty. The real results are clear. Jonathan is the father. Relief and fury collided so hard in my chest I had to grab the desk. Yeah, that happened. Jonathan steadied me like he'd been ready for that moment all along. Before I could exhale, the door opened again. Michael strode in with 2 men and slapped a court order on the wood. Tomorrow morning, public DNA test, judge presiding, whole country watching. Of course, it had to get louder before it got true. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Dawn at the courthouse felt like Judgment Day wrapped in heat. Cameras stacked on the steps like scaffolding voices, chanting signs with my name and my company, and words that don't belong in a family story. I wore a simple white gown because I was tired of hiding behind fabric. No heavy makeup, no diamonds, just a belly that made me pray in short breaths. Jonathan sat beside me in a clean navy caftan, old bag at his shoes, eyes calm like a man who has run out of things to prove. Inside, the judge read the order. The clerk took our samples and time became glue. People stared at me like I was a museum piece. Look, the billionaire who broke the woman who fell out of the story she wrote for herself. I looked over at Jonathan reading that same worn Bible. Why are you so calm? I whispered. Because truth doesn't shake, he said, it waits. Something in me let go, not trust exactly, but the blueprint for it. Hours later, the clerk came back with a sealed envelope. The judge opened it, eyes scanning words that would decide what kind of person I had been all along. The results confirm with 99.9% certainty that the father of Amanda Mandanda's unborn child is Jonathan Okoro. The sound that followed didn't have a name. Gasps, curses, cheers, camera shutters, a dozen different stories colliding in a single room. Michael shouted about bribes and corruption, and the judge slammed the gavel like a thunderclap. I turned and found Jonathan, and for the first time I saw him without the fog of humiliation or the armor of pride. I reached for his hand, he didn't hesitate, and when our fingers met, I felt the story change shape under my feet. The headlines started to swing, slowly at first, then like a tide you can't argue with. 2 weeks later, I stood behind a row of microphones, in an emerald gown, with my belly round, and unmistakable lights, hot and unforgiving. I told the truth without hiding behind fancy words. Pride is a cage, I said. The walls look like protection until you realize you can't breathe. I humiliated a man who needed help. When the story turned on me, I learned my armor was hollow. Today I choose truth over image. Today I stand beside the father of my child. I reached for Jonathan's hand again, not as a performance, but as a promise, and I could feel the room try to decide if it was allowed to clap. They did, because humans clap when our hearts need our hands to do something. In private, I still owed more. I asked Jonathan to come to the house with no cameras, no audience, just us, and the echo of every choice I'd made. I knelt, Yes, a pregnant billionaire on cold marble. And I asked him to forgive me for pouring water on his head like he was less than human. I opened a velvet box with a ring that sparkled with everything money can buy, and said, "Will you marry me? Not to fix a headline, not to win a vote, but to try building something clean." He lifted me before I finished crying and said, "You are strong, Amanda, but let me show you the right way." He took out a thin silver band he had carried for years, his mother's ring, and he asked me to be his wife, not because of shame, not because of fear, but because two broken souls can fit together like a door and its key. I said yes, because sometimes the hardest thing is also the only true thing. The wedding was loud and unapologetic, lace and laughter and 1,000 opinions. I walked slow because the baby insisted. The cathedral gleamed. The choir sang like the roof could rise. When the priest asked if we would choose each other, we both said, "I will," the kind of "I will" that doesn't need applause. People clapped anyway. A month later, our son arrived, pink and furious and perfect. We named him Williams. When Jonathan held him for the first time, tears slid down his face and he whispered, "This is the life they said I lost." I lay there watching them, and something in me finally unclenched. We took it slow after that, slower than I would have chosen a year earlier, because humility is a teacher who takes attendance. Jonathan joined Manda Group as CFO, because skill doesn't vanish when a man loses his address, and the market, it turns out, respects competence almost as much as gossip. Investors returned, contracts flowed again, and the scandal people said would end. Us became the story that made us real. At night, I'd sit on the balcony and watch Jonathan and Williams cross the garden, father and son, throwing a ball under warm lights. And I would think I lost everything once, but in losing, I found more than I dared to ask for. You know that feeling, when you finally exhale and the breath sounds like a prayer. Now here's the part that will split the comments, and I'm not hiding from it. That night at the mansion, I was drunk and vulnerable, missing pieces of memory, and he was the man who carried me upstairs. Consent power, the lines we draw in conversations, and the lines we face in the dark. I have lived with those questions. We talked about it not once, but many times, with honesty that stung and healed. I told him I reached for him and asked him to stay. He told me he would have left if I had said no, that he was trying to keep me alive in a night full of bad choices. Some of you will never accept that. Some of you will see your own complicated night in ours. Do you think that's fair, that the world wants a simple rule for a messy human moment? Humiliation returned just like he warned me, but grace came with it. And I don't mean grace as in pretty music and perfect smiles. I mean the hard daily work of opening your hand when your instincts say, "Hold on tighter." The choice to rebuild what you broke, the decision to stand beside someone you once dismissed and let the world decide what it thinks later. If you've listened this far, thank you. Not for me, but for your own story that rattles in your chest when the room goes quiet. So tell me this. Was the board right to demand my removal because the father of my child didn't fit their picture? Or were they using reputation as an excuse to keep control, to make sure the woman who built the company remembered who really holds the keys? Was the public DNA test justice or theater truth? Or a show that happened to land on the right answer? And where would you draw the line between compassion and accountability when power and vulnerability collide in the same room? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the moment you changed your mind about someone who didn't look like your kind of person. If this story hit you, share it with a friend who needs a second chance. Tag the person who taught you that truth doesn't shake, it waits. Like the video, subscribe for more messy, real human stories, and stick around. The next chapter is already knocking.